When my husband of 12 years told me he wanted a divorce and said, "You can't afford a lawyer to fight me," something inside me broke, but not the way he expected. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That night started like any other. I was finishing dinner when Ethan walked in, wearing the same sharp suit he always did. But there was something different. His eyes were colder, his tone distant. He didn't even sit down. He just stood there, holding a manila envelope, and said flatly, "Jessica, I want a divorce." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at him, waiting for a sign that it was a cruel joke, but his face stayed hard. He dropped the envelope on the counter like it meant nothing. My hands trembled as I opened it. Divorce papers, already signed on his end. He didn't even look sorry. "I'll be taking the house," he added casually. "It's under my name anyway. You'll get some money to start over. Don't bother getting a lawyer. You can't afford one, and it won't change anything." The way he said it broke something inside me. Not my heart, that had already started cracking months ago, but something deeper. It was disbelief mixed with humiliation. I had supported him for years, stood by him when he started his real estate firm, and managed our bills when money was tight. I believed we were a team. Clearly, I was wrong. I tried to ask why, but he cut me off. "Don't make this harder, Jess. You'll be fine." Then he turned and walked upstairs, like it was just another night. A few minutes later, I heard him on the phone laughing. A woman's voice echoed faintly in the background. I went to our bedroom later, hoping to talk, but he was packing a suitcase. "I'll stay somewhere else until things are finalized," he said without looking at me. "I've already spoken to a realtor about listing the property." It felt like my world was collapsing around me. Every photo on the walls, every memory in that house, now felt poisoned. I sat on the edge of the bed after he left, trying to understand how 12 years of marriage could end with a single sentence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through every room in silence, touching the furniture we picked together, the curtains I sewed by hand, the kitchen table where we'd shared countless meals. It didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like evidence of a lie. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, numb. But deep down, under all the pain, something began to stir. A quiet, steady voice that said, "He doesn't get to decide how this ends." I didn't know how, but After that night, things between Ethan and me changed completely. It was like I was living with a stranger. He barely looked at me, barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were cold and sharp. I started to realize that maybe this distance hadn't started suddenly. It had been building for a long time. Months before the divorce papers appeared, Ethan had started coming home late. At first, he said it was work. "Deals take time," he'd tell me, loosening his tie and pouring himself a drink. I believed him. I always believed him. But then, his excuses got weaker. Sometimes he'd come home past midnight, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. Other times, he wouldn't come home at all. I tried to talk to him about it. I asked if everything was okay, if work was stressing him out. He laughed and told me I was being dramatic. "Not everything is about you, Jess," he said one night, rolling his eyes. The way he said it stung more than I expected. Soon after, he started making comments about my job. I'd been an accountant for years, steady and reliable. I didn't make the kind of money he did, but I was proud of what I earned. One evening, while I was working on our monthly expenses, he looked at me and said, "You know, for someone who spends her days staring at numbers, you don't seem to understand how real business works." That wasn't the Ethan I knew. Or maybe it was, and I had just been too blind to see it. My friends noticed before I did. My best friend, Laura, mentioned something over coffee one afternoon. "Jess, who's that new assistant Ethan hired? Brielle, right? She's been posting pictures from all those work trips. He's in every one of them." I brushed it off immediately. "It's nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "He's just mentoring her. That's all." But my stomach twisted as I said it. I didn't want to believe it because believing it meant facing the truth, that Ethan might already be replacing me. The signs became harder to ignore. He started dressing better, using new cologne, buying gifts he claimed were for clients. He'd text during dinner and hide his phone when I walked by. When I asked if he was seeing someone, he snapped, "You're paranoid. You should be grateful I even come home." That word, grateful, hit me like a slap. Grateful? For what? For being ignored? For being treated like I didn't matter? That night, I realized this wasn't just distance, it was control. The man I loved had been slowly making me smaller, piece by piece, until I barely recognized myself. I started to see the pattern clearly, how he'd twist my words, how he'd make me question my own feelings. Every insult came disguised as advice, every cruel comment followed by, "I'm just being honest." It wasn't honesty. It was manipulation. And for the first time in a long while, I stopped trying to fix things. I started paying attention. Because somewhere deep down, I knew Ethan's betrayal ran deeper than late nights and cruel words. I just hadn't found the proof yet. Promised myself one thing: I wouldn't let him destroy me. Not like this. A few days after handing me the divorce papers, Ethan came by the house again. He didn't knock, he just walked in like he still owned every inch of it. I was sitting at the dining table with a cup of coffee, trying to figure out what my next step would be. He looked around like he was already inspecting the place for sale. "I've moved out," he said, voice calm and cold. "I'm staying with Brielle for now. It just makes sense." The words hit me hard, even though I had already suspected it. Hearing her name come out of his mouth so casually felt like being punched in the chest. I stayed quiet, staring at the table. He didn't even flinch. "I'll be putting the house on the market next week," he continued. "It's under my name, so the process should be simple. I'll have my lawyer send you the final papers." I finally looked up at him. "You're selling our home?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The home we built together?" He smirked. "My home, Jessica. You didn't build this. I did. You wouldn't even have been able to afford this neighborhood without me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those nights, I stayed up helping him balance his books. The early years when we scraped by to make mortgage payments, none of it mattered to him. He looked at me like I was a burden he was finally free of. Then came the part that burned the most. "You really don't have to make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "You can't afford a lawyer and you don't want to drag this out. Just sign the papers and walk away with some dignity. I'll make sure you get something to start over with. Maybe enough for an apartment." It wasn't just cruel, it was humiliating. The man who once promised to protect and love me was now mocking me for not earning as much as he did. I felt small and powerless, like he wanted me to. He turned to leave, pausing only to say, "Brielle and I will handle the sale details. I'll send movers for your things when it's time." I sat there after he left, my hands shaking around the coffee cup. I had never felt so worthless. He had everything planned: the lawyer, the sale, even his new life with her. He'd been preparing for months, while I was still trying to fix what I thought was a broken marriage. But as I sat there, something inside me shifted. Yes, I was hurt, but I wasn't stupid. I had managed our finances for years. I knew every transaction, every investment, every account he tried to hide behind his business. He thought I'd be too weak to fight, too broke to stand up for myself. What he didn't realize was that I'd spent my life understanding numbers, patterns, and details. I knew where his money came from, and maybe, just maybe, where it was quietly disappearing. Ethan had taken everything from me emotionally, but he had underestimated me. After Ethan left, the house felt empty, but strangely calm. I stopped crying. I stopped begging myself to understand him. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I knew if I didn't act smart, I'd lose everything. A few days later, I decided to start organizing the financial paperwork for the divorce. I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with. I opened the cabinet in his home office, a place he'd told me never to touch. It was filled with folders, contracts, and receipts from his company, Miller Urban Development. I had handled some of his paperwork years ago, so I knew his filing system well enough to find what I needed. At first, everything looked normal: tax forms, property deals, business expenses. But as I flipped through the pages, I noticed something odd. Several invoices had different company names I didn't recognize. The amounts were large and frequent, but they didn't match any of his usual projects. My curiosity grew stronger. I started digging deeper. I turned on his old desktop computer, the one he never let me use. To my surprise, it wasn't password protected. Inside, there were spreadsheets labeled private accounts. The numbers didn't add up. Money was being moved in and out of accounts that weren't listed in any of the company books. I saw transfers to offshore banks and shell companies under random names. My heart started racing. This wasn't just business accounting, it was something illegal. The realization hit me hard. Ethan wasn't just cruel and arrogant. He was committing fraud. For a moment, I sat frozen. The man who told me I couldn't afford to fight him was hiding money all over the place. He had underestimated me, thinking I wouldn't notice or even look. But this was my field. Numbers told me everything I needed to know. I took a deep breath and grabbed my laptop. I started copying the files carefully, emails, spreadsheets, contracts, everything that showed a pattern. I moved them to a flash drive and hid it inside a box of old family photos in the attic. My hands were shaking, but I knew this might be the only way to protect myself. As I continued, I found one document that made my stomach twist. It was a payment made to an agent overseas, marked confidential transaction. The amount was enough to buy another house. I didn't know what he was buying, but I knew he didn't want anyone finding out. By the time I was done, it was past midnight. I sat there, staring at the computer screen, realizing how deep his lies went. He wasn't just trying to leave me, he was trying to erase me from everything, financially and emotionally. But now I had something he didn't expect. Proof. Real, solid proof that could destroy his career if used correctly. I turned off the computer, locked the office door, and went to bed with one thought running through my mind. Ethan thought he was untouchable. But soon, he was going to learn that I wasn't the helpless woman he believed I was. Completely. And that would soon become his biggest mistake. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. The sadness was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let Ethan destroy me quietly. If he wanted a fight, he was going to get one, but not the kind he expected. I started by going through my old contacts, searching for someone I could trust. That's when I remembered Ryan Turner, an old friend from college. He was one of the smartest people I knew, now a financial attorney who specialized in corporate fraud. We hadn't spoken in years, but I decided to take the chance. I called him the same afternoon. My voice shook as I explained the situation, leaving out the emotional parts and focusing on what I'd found. There was silence for a moment on the other end before he said, "Jess, send me everything. Right now." I hesitated. "You think it's really that serious?" "I think," he said slowly, "your husband's been doing something that could land him in prison if you handle this right." I scanned and sent over copies of the documents and spreadsheets I'd discovered. Within hours, Ryan called me back. His voice was sharper this time. "You weren't wrong. Those accounts are illegal transfers. He's hiding millions, Jess. Don't tell anyone you found this. Not a word. Let him think you're still broken." I promised him I would. Over the next few days, Ryan and I worked quietly. He guided me on what to do, what to keep, what to back up, and how to act around Ethan. He offered to represent me for free, saying, "This isn't about money. It's about justice." That meant everything to me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. When Ethan came back to the house to finalize some documents, I did exactly what Ryan told me to do. I played the part. I smiled weakly, nodded at everything he said, and pretended to accept defeat. "You were right," I told him softly. "I can't fight this. I just want peace." He smirked, clearly enjoying his victory. "Good choice," he said. "You're being smart for once." I wanted to slap that smug expression off his face, but I didn't. I let him believe he had won. The more confident he felt, the sloppier he would get. When he left, I closed the door slowly and exhaled. My hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from power. Each night after that, I worked in secret with Ryan. We built our case carefully, collecting more proof from Ethan's accounts, business partners, and past transactions. I learned to mask my emotions completely when Ethan called or texted. I kept my tone calm, polite, even kind. He thought I was weak, defeated, and ready to walk away quietly. But underneath that act, I was building something strong, a plan that would take everything he valued away from him. He had told me once that I couldn't afford a lawyer. He was right, I couldn't. But I didn't need money. I had truth, patience, and a powerful ally. And soon, Ethan would realize that the woman he tried to break was the one who was going to bring him down. A few weeks later, Ethan started showing up in the news and social circles again. He was always the kind of man who loved attention, and now that he had Brielle by his side, he seemed eager to show her off. I started hearing from mutual friends that he was taking her everywhere: business dinners, charity events, even interviews. He wanted the world to see his new beginning. The hardest part came when I got an invitation to the annual charity gala I used to organize. It had always been one of my proudest accomplishments, a fundraiser for families in need that Ethan and I used to host together. I almost didn't go that year. The thought of seeing him with her made my stomach turn. But then I realized something. I had spent too long hiding while he paraded around like he'd already won. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. So I went. I wore a simple black dress, nothing too flashy, but enough to make me feel strong again. When I walked into the ballroom, I could feel the stares immediately. Whispers followed me wherever I went. People weren't subtle. They glanced at me, then at Ethan, standing near the stage with Brielle on his arm. She looked exactly how I expected. Young, polished, trying too hard to fit into a world she didn't understand yet. Ethan looked proud, like he was showing off a new trophy. When his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of surprise, then amusement. He leaned down and whispered something to Brielle, and they both laughed. I didn't react. I refused to give them that power. As the night went on, I kept my composure. I smiled, greeted people, and made small talk. I didn't bring up the divorce or his betrayal. I wanted to show them all that I was fine, that he hadn't broken me. Later that evening, as I was stepping out to get some air, Brielle found me near the terrace. Her tone was smug, her smile too sweet to be genuine. "You're brave for coming here," she said. "I don't think I could show my face if I were in your position." I looked at her calmly. "And what position is that?" She tilted her head. The ex-wife who didn't know her husband was done with her until it was too late. She chuckled softly and added, "You should have known your place." For a moment, I almost let her words sting. But instead, I smiled, a calm, steady smile that seemed to confuse her. "Oh," I said quietly, "I do now." She blinked, unsure what I meant. I walked away without another word. That one sentence was all I needed to say. As I left the event that night, I didn't feel humiliated anymore. I felt powerful. Every whisper, every fake smile, every cruel glance only reminded me of what I was about to do. They saw a woman who'd been replaced. What they didn't know was that I was already building the storm that would take Ethan and everything he valued down to the ground. The morning everything changed was quiet and calm. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, staring at the folder that held months of work, proof of Ethan's lies, his hidden accounts, and his fake business deals. Ryan had gone over every detail twice. It was airtight. Everything was ready. That day, we filed 2 sets of documents. The first went to the state attorney's office, evidence of Ethan's financial crimes. The second was my divorce filing, complete with full disclosure of his hidden assets and records of his affair with Brielle. I felt a mix of fear and relief as I handed them over. It was finally out of my hands. Ryan looked at me as we left the office. "Once this hits him, Jess, he's going to panic. Don't respond to anything he says. Just let the law do the work." I nodded, though my stomach was tight with nerves. I had spent so long pretending to be defeated that part of me almost believed it. But now, everything was different. I wasn't the quiet, scared wife anymore. I was ready to fight. That afternoon, Ethan was having lunch with a group of investors at a downtown restaurant. I knew because he still used the joint business account to pay for those fancy meals. Ryan told me later what happened. One of the servers delivered an envelope to his table, marked with my lawyer's seal. He opened it casually at first, probably expecting routine paperwork. But as his eyes scanned the pages, his whole face changed. The confidence drained from him. He stood up, muttered something, and stormed out of the restaurant. His investors were left sitting there, confused and whispering among themselves. Within hours, my phone started buzzing. He called, then texted. I didn't answer. The messages turned from calm to furious. "What did you do?" he wrote. Then another. "You're making a mistake." The last one was shorter. Just, "You'll regret this." I didn't reply to any of them. That evening, Ryan called to update me.
"It started," he said.
The state attorney's office opened a preliminary investigation. Once they confirm the documents, it'll move fast. He's in serious trouble. I thanked him quietly. When I hung up, I finally allowed myself to breathe. For months, Ethan had made me feel powerless, like everything was slipping out of my hands. Now the balance was shifting. I imagined his expression. How shocked he must have been to realize that I wasn't broken, that the woman he mocked for not being able to afford a lawyer had outsmarted him completely. He'd spent months setting a trap for me, and in the end, he'd walked straight into mine. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. Not because everything was over, but because I finally knew it would be. Ethan's empire of lies was crumbling, and he had no idea how much worse it was going to get. The day of the court hearing arrived sooner than I expected. I had spent weeks preparing with Ryan, going over every detail, every file, every possible question that might come up. Still, walking into that courtroom made my heart race. Ethan was already there, sitting beside his high-priced lawyer, dressed in one of his custom suits. He looked confident, maybe even amused. He gave me a cold smile when I entered, the kind that said he still thought he was in control. I sat quietly beside Ryan, keeping my eyes on the judge. Ethan's lawyer started by painting a perfect picture of him, a successful businessman, a generous husband, and a victim of a vindictive wife who was trying to ruin his reputation. His voice was smooth, his words carefully chosen. For a moment, it almost sounded convincing. But then it was our turn. Ryan stood up calmly and began to speak. "Your Honor," he said, "we have evidence that Mr. Miller has not been honest about his financial situation." He handed the judge a folder filled with copies of the files I had found, the fake invoices, the offshore accounts, the hidden properties. As he explained each piece, Ethan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then came the moment that changed everything. Just as Ethan's lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was taken out of context, two prosecutors from the state attorney's office entered the room. The judge paused as they handed over a sealed document. "Your Honor," one of them said, "this pertains to an active criminal investigation involving Mr. Miller's company." Ethan's face went pale. He turned toward his lawyer, whispering rapidly. The confidence he had carried for months was gone in seconds. The courtroom grew tense as the judge reviewed the document, her expression firm. When Brielle was called to testify, she looked terrified. She avoided Ethan's eyes completely. Under pressure, she admitted that she had helped him move money between accounts and sign false documents, claiming she didn't know how illegal it was at first. Her voice shook as she said, "He told me it was just temporary, that everyone did it." Ethan's lawyer tried to stop her, but it was too late. Every word, she said, dug his hole deeper. By the time it was over, there was nothing left for him to say. The judge looked directly at Ethan and said, "This court finds that you have intentionally hidden assets and committed fraud. The property in question, the marital home, will remain under Mrs. Miller's ownership." She continued, outlining the settlement. "I would receive full ownership of the house, a significant share of his business profits, and the private holdings registered in my name." Ethan didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the table. The same man who once told me I couldn't afford to fight him couldn't even lift his head. When the gavel finally struck, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate. I simply stood up, thanked Ryan quietly, and walked out of that courtroom with my head high. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. Ethan's money and power had failed him, and all he had left was the wreckage of his own choices. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within a week of the court ruling, Ethan's company started falling apart. Investors began pulling out, business partners distanced themselves, and the media was flooded with reports about his fraud investigation. The man who once bragged about being untouchable was suddenly at the center of a scandal that everyone wanted to talk about. His face appeared on every news channel, but not as a respected businessman anymore. Reporters described him as a fraudster, a manipulator, and a liar. His offices were raided by authorities, and his accounts were frozen. Every luxury he had once flaunted, his cars, his private memberships, his lavish trips, was gone within days. His empire had been built on lies, and now it was crumbling piece by piece. Jessica watched it all unfold quietly. She didn't celebrate or gloat. She had already moved beyond him emotionally. Still, there was a quiet satisfaction in seeing justice finally catch up to him. For years, he had made her feel small, powerless, and dependent. Now, it was clear who had truly been in control all along. When the court's final orders were carried out, Jessica moved back into the house Ethan had tried to take from her. The place that had once felt heavy with memories of his cruelty now became her sanctuary. She redecorated it completely, new colors, new furniture, new light. Every room she changed felt like reclaiming a part of herself that he had tried to erase. The home that once symbolized her pain became her sign of freedom and strength. Neighbors who used to whisper out of pity now greeted her with respect. Her friends came by more often, helping her paint and laugh again. For the first time in years, she could breathe without fear of being judged or controlled. Meanwhile, Ethan's downfall continued. His closest associates turned on him to save themselves. Several of them testified against him in exchange for lighter penalties. With each revelation, his situation worsened. Eventually, the authorities pressed criminal charges for fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. The day he was arrested, Jessica received a call from an unknown number. She didn't have to answer to know who it was. Still, she looked at the screen for a moment. It was Ethan calling from jail. Her phone rang for a few seconds, but she didn't pick up. There was nothing left to say. The man who once spoke to her with arrogance and cruelty was now desperate for a voice from the outside world, and she had no reason to give him one. She pressed decline, set the phone down, and continued arranging flowers on her kitchen table. The sunlight poured through the windows, warm and peaceful. She smiled softly to herself, realizing she no longer felt anger or bitterness. What she felt was peace. Pure, quiet peace. Ethan's empire was gone, but she had rebuilt herself stronger than ever. And that, she knew, was the real victory. Months passed, and life slowly began to take a new shape for Jessica. The chaos had ended, leaving behind silence and space to rebuild. But Jessica wasn't the same woman who once cried over broken promises and betrayal. She had learned the strength that comes from survival, the courage born from standing up for yourself when no one expects you to. Instead of returning to her old accounting job, Jessica decided to start something new, something meaningful. She opened a small financial consulting firm, focused on helping women who had gone through similar experiences, financial manipulation, dependence, or abuse. Her goal was simple: to help them understand money, build independence, and never be trapped again. At first, she worked out of her home office. Her first client was a young mother who had been left penniless by her ex-husband. Then came another and another. Word spread quickly through quiet recommendations. Within 6 months, her firm had grown into a proper office downtown, filled with women who believed in what she was doing. Jessica didn't share her full story often. She didn't need to. Her calm confidence and steady voice were enough to inspire trust. Every time she saw a client walk out of her office standing taller, she felt something heal inside her too. She was turning her pain into purpose, and that made every struggle worth it. Ryan, her old friend, and the lawyer who helped her through everything, visited often to check in. He teased her about how fast her business was growing, calling her the woman who beat a millionaire and became one herself. Jessica laughed, but she never let success change her. She stayed humble, remembering the nights she sat alone with nothing but fear and a folder of documents that would one day save her. Her home, the same house Ethan tried to steal, was now full of warmth and light. She decorated it with art that represented freedom, soft blues, golden tones, and open spaces. Every detail reminded her that she had survived something meant to destroy her. One quiet evening, after finishing some paperwork, Jessica poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window. The city lights reflected softly through the glass as she looked around her living room, the same space where her husband once told her she would never win. She smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "You said I couldn't afford to fight. Turns out I couldn't afford not to." It wasn't said with anger, just calm certainty. Her revenge had never been about destroying Ethan. It had been about reclaiming herself. She didn't need the world to know her story to feel powerful. The fact that she had survived, rebuilt, and risen on her own was enough. As she turned off the lights and walked toward her room, she felt peace settle around her like a soft blanket. The past was behind her. The future was hers to shape. And Jessica Miller, once underestimated, once broken, had finally risen, not as someone's wife, but as a woman who had learned her worth and built her freedom from the ground up.